Thanks. My name's Hilda. I'm an alcoholic. AA does what? I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and thank you, Pat, for your 10 minutes. Margaret and the committee for asking me to come up. Janet and Jim for giving us a lift from the airport. And, I live in Los Angeles, and I love it when I come to some place like Sacramento or, Oklahoma, and they go, ooh, traffic's going to be rough. Of course it is. And your one traffic light's off, right? So Sacramento Spring Fling, who knew? There's a lot of people here tonight. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, I have to say. And with a crowd like this, you're bound to have, possibly, although I don't know, maybe not in Sacramento, but you might have some Texans here tonight. And just in case, my sponsor always says, in case if you're in Texas or you're somewhere where there might be Texans, you should always give your sobriety date. Because for some reason, Texans think if you don't give it, you don't have one. So my sobriety date is the 20th of July, 1993. And it's not my first sobriety date, but I hope it's my last. And let's see, I obviously am not born in Los Angeles. Fresno, no, kidding. I was born in London, and I grew up in a pub. And no, I really did. My grandparents owned the pub, and I'm an only child, an only grandchild. And I had a thing about alcohol long before I ever drank it. I like the shapes of the bottles and the colors and the fancy labels. And, only children like myself are very good at entertaining ourselves. And for me, my playground was the cellar. And I loved it. I loved it. And I always share this because I can see it today. I'd be down in the cellar and I would line the whiskey bottles up on one side and the vodka bottles up on the other, and I'd have the whiskey bottles chatting to the vodka bottles, and they'd be chatting to me and I'd be chatting to them. And vodka was the good guys and whiskey was the bad guys, And the only sad part about that is it was still happening in my 20s, but but I loved it. I loved it long before I ever tasted it. And my granddad's pub was in the shape of a U, and he had 3 bars in it. And out the back, the kitchen and the long bar, and then there was a little alleyway between the two. And my bedroom was above the kitchen. And the 2 bars in the front were very quiet. And, the cocktail bar where people went after work and would have 2 glasses and go home, or the front bar, which is what it was called, because it was in the front. And, you'd find kind of old people in there nursing a brandy all day. And even when I was little, neither of those were attractive to me, But the long bar had life. It had the pool table and the darts tournaments, and the police would get called and the fights would break out. And from my bedroom window, it was like better than telly, It was always something going on, and I loved it, and I would watch it for hours. And in London, they had this thing called lock-in at the time, and after hours, they'd lock all the doors, and the regulars got to stay. And they would turn down the lights, and they'd turn down the jukebox. And from my bedroom window, all you could see was the neon glowing through the optics on the bottles, and it just looked magic. And I snuck down one night, and my granddad flagged me in. And I didn't know how old I was. I just know that my pajamas still had feet in them, And I snuck in, and my granddad put me up in a bar stool, and he gave me a baby sham. And at the time, baby sham came in a little bottle, and I was a little person. And, the logo on the bottle was this cartoon deer that was sort of leaping, And he put it in a little glass, and I'd arrived. And to this day, I cannot, unlike Pat, I can't tell you if I liked the taste or if I got drunk or tipsy, I have no clue. I just know that night I got to be one of them. I got to be part of, all these people that I've been watching for so long. And, I really think I probably spent the rest of me drinking trying to get that night back, Of course, it never really happened. But, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, around page 33, and I'm paraphrasing because I know there's people in here who know the book way better than I do, but around page 33 it says something like, it doesn't matter how often you drink, what you drink, it's what happens when you drink. And that many who are merely potential alcoholics often become the real thing in a relatively short amount of time, particularly true of women. And I am one of those women. By 16 I had an ulcer. At 17 I got done for drunk driving for the first time. At 18 I had a heart attack, and 6 months later I was in my first mental hospital. And that's when drink was working. It's, it all went downhill after that, Over the next 3 years, I was in and out of 5 mental hospitals, and the longest amount of time I was out of a mental hospital in that 3 years was 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, I was in my own flat. I had the curtains drawn, no duct tape. The answering machine on, and a fridge full of Asti Spumante, vodka, and Michelob Light. Because I was always watching calories too, But I can tell you that for 2 weeks I did not see or speak to another human being, and I was happy. I have a clear memory of standing in the shower, drinking a cold Mick Light, not knowing if it was day or night, not caring, and thinking it just doesn't get any better than this, But what happened was I got a knock on the door one day, and it was my mom, my shrink, 2 policemen, and 2 nurses. They shot me in the arse with something and put me in a jacket with really long arms. And I came to at the Institute for the Living in Hartford, Connecticut. And I felt like I was on candid camera. I'd been punked or something, because it seemed surreal to me, I found out that I had been committed for a minimum of a year for being a danger to myself and others. I hadn't seen anybody for 2 weeks. I couldn't figure out who the others were, And it really bothered me, But anybody who's been in a place like that knows the people in those places are crazy, Now, I have always known I'm a little bit off, right? I've always known that I'm not really a full ticket. I don't think I've ever been a full ticket. I don't think I'll ever be a full ticket. And quite honestly, I don't believe there is a program in the world that will make me a full ticket. What I do know is that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the tools that allow me to act as if I'm a full ticket. And I'm running with that today, right? Oh, you're an odd bunch. So I'm in this mental hospital, and I know they don't know what's wrong with me, but I have this roommate, and it's really obvious what's wrong with her, right? I mean, she has rage attacks. 1 minute she's fine, and then she snaps, and she starts punching out windows and going for nurses, and it's chaos. And of course, I'm sitting on the bed reading, nothing going on here. I am good. They did this thing called wet packing, and all these nurses would come in, they would tackle her to the floor, wrap her in cold, wet sheets, and toddle her away. Now, she had something I didn't have, and that was friends locally. And her friends used to smuggle money in all the time. So our room always had money hidden in it. So when she'd get toddled away, I'd start thinking, right? Because I'm a thinker. So I think, what a waste it is to leave all that money just laying around, So I would go AWOL on her dime. And first time I went AWOL, I had $50 on me. I ended up in downtown Hartford. And I had no clue what I was going to do. And this little fellow wandered up to me and he said, "Psst, do you want to buy a ticket to Prince?" Now, I didn't know who Prince was. I am truly an AC/DC Black Sabbath kind of girl. But I'm thinking a dark auditorium, this may work, you know. So I get these tickets, I smuggle 2 bottles of vodka in, I'm sitting in the nosebleed seats, and while Prince did his little raspberry beret thing, I got absolutely legless, you know, and after the concert I was wandering around Hartford and I ended up in the park, and there was a group of fellas passing a bottle, winos really, and I sat down with them. And they kept looking at me like stupid or crazy. But they let me drink with them all night. They never said a word. And as dawn came, the white van with the blue letters pulled up, Institute for the Living. And I stood up and said, I got to go. My ride's here, you know. And it's a true story. And, you know, these fellas just looked at each other like, yep, crazy. Right? So I get back to the hospital, and I'd have to build up my little trust points, and anybody who's been institutionalized knows about that. And, you know, as time was going on, I was getting tired, and I wasn't going as far when I went AWOL. And one of the last times I went AWOL, I ended up in this pizza joint right around the corner from the hospital. And as I went in, I thought, okay, Hilda, this time we are going to do this like a lady. We're going to do this properly. So I walk in, I order a slice of pizza and 2 pitchers of beer. I sit down in the booth and I start pouring it in the glass because we're going to do this like a lady. But what happened was some of the nurses from my unit came in on their break. So now I'm down in the booth with the pitcher up to my mouth, trying to get as much down me as I can before they see me, you know. Just madness. So my year anniversary was coming up, and I had to go before a board of psychiatrists, and my psychiatrist stood up and said, Hilda will never live in normal society. She is completely incapable. And his recommendation was that I did a minimum of another year. And it took me about 2.5 months to get out, so I did 14.5 months total. And in hindsight, I think he may have had a point. Because I got out. I moved from Hartford to Hamden, which was just down the road. I got a little job, and I met a fella. And this fella turned out to be a coke dealer. And I'd never done coke before. And I had no idea that you could drink longer on coke. Right? All of you people nodding already knew that. I did not. But I tell you what happened. In a relatively short amount of time, I've got this little job at $700 a week. I have a coke habit of $1,500 a week. And when you do the math, it wasn't coming out terribly well. And I was sitting on the counter in my kitchen one day looking out at my flat. I was drinking a case of Mick Light at the time. And I realized I sold everything, including my curtains, for coke. And I thought, Hilda, if you're hanging out with people who will buy your curtains, we have a problem here. Do you know, I never did coke again. In fact, I'd be in parties and people around me would be doing coke and my head would go, remember the curtains. Right? Now, I think that's what makes me a real alcoholic, because far worse things happen to me drinking than ever happened to me with coke. And my head never once said, don't drink. What it might say is, don't drink red wine because it makes you cry. You know, stay away from the whiskey because it makes you mean. Or my version of chapter 3, switching from scotch to brandy or Scott to Randy. But it never said don't drink, right? So I'm in Hamden, I get done for drunk driving, drunk and disorderly, indecent exposure, and I think I never should have left England. It was so much better there. And I moved to England, and I'm not in England very long. I get done for drunk driving, drunk and disorderly, indecent exposure, and I think, you know, America was so much better. What was I thinking? Of course, you know, that's my drinking in a nutshell. Everywhere I went, there I was, you know, and I have a long list of arrests for indecent exposure. And I know I don't seem the type now. Maybe a little. But something happens when you add alcohol to my type of alcoholic. And I know I'm not alone in Alcoholics Anonymous because I've heard a lot of women share. But as soon as you add alcohol to my type of alcoholic, for whatever reason, I just know that you have to see my tits. Now, I tried. I know Jean's looking at me like, what? It happens. Now, I know that that's part of my alcoholism because I do not feel the need to show them to you right now. Right? So I'm back and forth, and I'm back in England, and I'm tending bar with my mate Andy. He's a good friend of mine. We've been a good friend for a long time, and Andy's birthday was on New Year's Eve, so we started drinking on Christmas Eve, as you do. Now, I've always been a blackout drinker, right? I used to call it losing time. I was always just losing time. I'd lose a couple hours, I might lose a weekend, whatever. I had assumed that when I had lost time, I had passed out quietly somewhere. I found out that is not true. Because what happened was on the 3rd of January, the phone was ringing, and when I answered it, it was my mate Andy, and he asked me if I was ready to pick out rings. And I had no clue what he was talking about. And he said, no, Hilda, not this time. Now, he brought over a video. I'm on this video, and I look great. I look great. I am not slurring my words. I am not walking funny. I have drink in hand the whole time. It's all the pubs we were in. All our friends were there. My father was there. I'm watching the video. Andy went down on one knee, and I thought, dear God, say no. Because I wasn't there. And it was the first time I realized that you didn't know I wasn't there. You know what I mean? So I did what I did best, really. I went to the pub. And I panicked, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I found the guy in the pub that knows everything about everything, right? There's a guy like this in every bar all over the world. You know, you ask him what time it is, he tells you how the pendulum clock works, you know. I mean, he truly is the most interesting man in the world, right? So I'm chatting away to this fella, and I said I told him I'm engaged, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, did you know if you volunteer on a kibbutz in Israel, they give you 3 meals a day, they do your laundry, and you get 50 quid a month? I thought, result. 3 days later, I'm in Golders Green, I've got a visa, I'm going to Israel. Now, I'm a good Irish Catholic girl. This all made sense to me. I went for 3 months, I stayed 9. And I come out of a blackout in a Tel Aviv jail charged with drunk driving, and I didn't remember renting the car. And I can tell you that really horrible things happen to young, vulnerable women who drink like I do in places like that. And I got out on bail, and I ended up jumping bail, and I went to Egypt, and I ended up with the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. And really horrible things happen to young, vulnerable women who drink like I do in places like that. I ended up getting dumped just near the American Embassy in Cairo, and I had a tattered T-shirt on me, a beat-up pair of shorts, and not another thing to my name. And a big American Marine took pity on me. It was Ramadan, and everything was shut, including the embassy, and him and his mates looked after me until the embassy opened. And I can tell you that I truly believe a non-alcoholic woman who had been through what I had been through would probably never drink again. But I'm a goalpost drinker. I'm one of those drinkers that says, if it gets bad, I move the goalpost back just a little bit. And I say, if it gets worse, I move the goalpost back just a little bit more. I got an emergency passport, and I was on a flight out of Cairo, and I wasn't 20 minutes in the air, and I thought, hell, they could have killed me. I was drunk when I landed. And I had no clue that it was alcoholism. I didn't know what was happening. And the whole 80s for me are a bit like the Talking Heads song, Once in a Lifetime, where he goes, this is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. How did I get here? You know, it's like one big long blackout with little bits of reality tossed in. And coming to the end of the 80s, I found out I was in a relationship that apparently I had been in for quite a while. And my partner was commenting on my drinking. which I just thought was rude. So I moved. I moved to Papillion, Nebraska, and moved in with me mum. And I wasn't with me mum very long, and she started commenting on my drinking. And I really didn't know what to do. And I thought about my uncle. Now, my uncle had tried to 12-step me when I was 18 in a pub in St. Albans. He was on fire with Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was buying the beer, so I let him talk, right? And I remember him saying, you know, Hilda, in Alcoholics Anonymous, you need never drink again. I was 18. I thought, why the hell wouldn't I want to drink? But he could see exactly what was going on, and fast forward, it's all gone horribly wrong, and I thought of him. And he was still sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was really attractive to me because he was what I thought a real alcoholic was, right? My uncle went to prison. I only ever went to jail, you know? My uncle went to detox centers. I only ever went to mental hospitals. So in my mind, he was what a real alcoholic was, and yet he was still sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I thought I'd give it a go. And I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on New Year's Eve, 1989. I picked New Year's Eve because I truly believe no alcoholic would quit drinking on New Year's Eve. I know today only alcoholics pick a date. Non-alcoholics never think about what day they're going to stop drinking. They don't worry about their drinking. You know, it's like virgins don't go for pregnancy tests. It doesn't happen, right? And I didn't know that, so I toddled along to this meeting on New Year's Eve, and they were talking about He's the Father and we're the children, and I thought I was screwed, right? Because I've always been a seeker. I mean, Israel, please, right? So I couldn't hear anything else in the meeting, so I started taking everybody's inventory by their shoes, because I can't look at you either. And the fella next to me had on the biggest pair of cowboy boots I'd ever seen. And I remember thinking, I wonder if his IQ is any bigger than his boot size. You know, I mean, tearing these people to shreds. And after the meeting, I made a beeline for my car, and this big, dumb cowboy followed me out. And he said, have you got a big book? I said, of course I have a big book. Doesn't everybody have a big book? Now, I wouldn't have known a big book if you'd beat me with it. But I couldn't tell him that, right? But without missing a beat, he went to his truck, and he gave me his big book. And I was completely speechless, because the first time anybody'd seen straight through me. And I went to get in my car, and this little old woman ran up to me and said, did you know if you go to a lot of meetings and you don't drink in between, you can't get drunk? Thank you. So I'm leaving this parking lot thinking these people are freaks, right? But I'll tell you what happened. As I was driving away, that little woman's voice resonated in my head, and I thought, you know what, she may have a point here. If I went to a lot of these meetings and I didn't drink in between, I may stay out of trouble. And that's what was attractive to me. So I spent the next 3 years in Alcoholics Anonymous as a rocket to stardom. And if you have any time in Alcoholics Anonymous at all, you know exactly who I'm talking about. I look good. I sound good. I have memorized chapter 5, not just where it says God could and would. I'm talking about chapter 5. And the reality is I'm coming in late. I'm leaving early. I'd say my name's Hilda. I'm an alcoholic, but the little voice in the back of my head would say, well, my mother thinks so. My uncle thinks so. You know, but I'm getting better jobs, and I'm in dry clean only clothes. I've got nice cars, and I'm really starting to think that the steps are for those of you who are really unwell. And there seem to be a lot of you, right? That really you should be glad I'm here because you need me. You know, arrogance and ignorance is what I suffered from, and I had no clue. No clue. I got a sponsor because people give me a hard time about not having one. You know what they're like, right? So I found the oldest, frailest woman I could find. I figured she wouldn't give me a hard time. I was wrong. But what happened was she tried really hard, and, you know, I had no clue what was going on. And, She got really, really ill, and she was dying in hospital. And I went to see her one day, and she said, just remember, Hilda, Alcoholics Anonymous will be here for you when you come back. I hadn't drank yet. Had no clue what she was talking about, but she could see exactly what was going on. And, of course, when she passed away, I pulled away. I went from 7 meetings a week to 5 to 4, 3 a week, 2 a week, 2 a month, because now I'm very busy. And I'm not going to Friday night because the same woman shares the same shite every week, and I'm just not listening to it, right? And I'm not going to Wednesday night because I can't stand the secretary. And now I'm taking AA's inventory. And what happened was I was in Florida. I was on my way to my dream job in Germany, the job I had always wanted. My partner had come back because I wasn't drinking, and we're walking on the beach one day, and she turned to me and said, you know what, Hilda, not only do I not like you, I don't love you drunk or sober. And I thought, are you kidding? 3.5 years I haven't had a drink for you, which was my other problem. So I took my now ex to the airport, and as the plane took off, I walked in the bar. I started with double Jack, because that's how I drink. Started drinking on the Thursday, arrived in Germany on the Sunday, started my new job on the Monday, got done for drunk driving on the Friday, and woke up in a wet bed next to my new boss on Saturday morning. That's my drinking. Glamour drinking. I drank like that for 9 months. You know, I've heard people stand at podiums and say, if you want to pick up where you left off, pick up a drink tomorrow. Absolutely not my experience. When I started drinking after not drinking, my drinking was 10 times worse and more. My blackouts were longer. The people I woke up next to were uglier. Beds were wetter. It's not where I left off. On the morning after what I hope is my last night before I woke up in my own bed, which had become a bonus, the bed was wet and I was still dressed from work, and all of this is very normal for me now. But I went into the bathroom and my hose were all ripped. I had a great gash down my face. There was blood everywhere, and I had no clue what had happened the night before. And I had that moment. You know, I heard people in Alcoholics Anonymous talk about the hideous 4 horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. I just think, God, you're so dramatic. That morning I knew who they were, and my heart broke. Not because I can't drink anymore. I drink with the best of them. But that morning I realized I had become unpredictable to me. I did not care when I was unpredictable to you. And I did the only thing I knew what to do. I phoned English-speaking AA. You know, I didn't know where else to go. And the fellow who answered the phone's name was Steve Baker. He lets me break his anonymity. And I told him my sad old story. Poor old me, been to AA, screwed it up, whine, whine, whine. And he said something to me I truly believe saved my life. He said, you know, Hilda, the most natural thing in the world for an alcoholic to do is drink. And that's why in Alcoholics Anonymous we don't shoot our wounded. And I believed him. It's the only reason why I went to a meeting that night. I really thought he understood, you know. So I'm driving over to this meeting in Hunsbroek, Holland. And my head kicks in, right? Because I suffer from alcoholism. My head goes, hang on a minute, Hilda. We don't want anybody to think you're new, right? I don't want anybody to think I don't know what's going on in here. I mean, I memorized chapter 5. So I'm thinking about the meetings in Florida and California, you know, big meetings. And I thought what I would do is I would come in and sit in the back, get a little bit of time, and then tell you what happened, right? I walked into this meeting in Hunsbroek, Holland. There were 7 people in the room for an hour and a half. And nobody was letting me pass. You know, it's not hard to see who the newcomer is, right? They're all shiny and new. I'm all bloated and beaten up. I look like a vision for you, you know, and so I told them all my sad old story. And, you know, at the end of the meeting, they were looking for somebody to make the tea and coffee. And I was thinking, wow, I hope they find somebody. You know, it's an important commitment. And this voice from across the room went, Hilda will do it. And I thought, Hilda who? This meeting was Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and this was Tuesday night. I said, I don't know if I'm going to be sober on Thursday. It seemed like a long time to me. And she said, if you want to stay sober, you'll make the tea and coffee. And I thought, who is that psycho bitch, and why is she tormenting me? But my mouth went, oh, okay. I had no fight left. And if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, I hope you're tired. I would have done anything that woman asked me to do, and I tried because I just didn't know what else to do. And I didn't know if it was the Thursday or the Saturday, but she pulled me aside one night and said, you really need to try to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I said, do you see where we are? Hunsbrook, Holland. It is nowhere. Hang a left. She goes, oh, I know where we are, Hilda, but they have a meeting in Dusseldorf on Friday night and Kaiserslautern on Wednesday and Dahan on Monday. I was like, I said, I'm not driving all over God's acre for a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not happening. She goes, huh, how far did you drive for a drink? Which is so not fair, right? I am that drunk at 2 a.m. driving around for anything open, right? So I started tormenting my home group because I had a thing when I was drinking. If I got lost, all bets were off. I did it on the way to weddings, job interviews. It just didn't matter. If I got lost, I found a B&B, got a couple of bottles, and called it a night. So I was afraid to get lost. So on Thursday, I'd say to my home group, I'm driving to Dusseldorf tomorrow night. Does anybody want to go? The guy I hated the most. Hated. Always went, I'll go with you, Hilda. It's like anybody but you, right? But Mike would show up every Friday. We would drive an hour and a half to Dusseldorf, an hour and a half's meeting, an hour's coffee afterwards, and an hour and a half's drive home. And I wanted to kill him the entire time. He had about 8 years of sobriety at the time, and I've pulled over on the Autobahn to tell him to get out. And he would just laugh. We're going to be late if you don't get going. Kill this guy. I'm so grateful for where I got sober because I learned principles before personalities. You have to when you hate your home group, They're all you've got, But I'm very lucky, and I was reminded of this the other day. I'm really lucky for the home group that I got sober in because they were active in Alcoholics Anonymous. They were very active and passionate about Alcoholics Anonymous. And they were doing 12-step calls. And I was over at the woman who became my sponsor, the psycho woman. And I was over at her house one night, and her husband and one of his sponsees got a 12-step call, and they were all excited, and they went out to do this 12-step call, and I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And they came back a few hours later, and my sponsor said to her husband, where's the new guy? And he said, oh, you're never going to believe what happened. We went out to do this 12-step, and we got there, and there were lights on in the house, but he wouldn't answer the door, so we broke in, and we were looking for him, and there was nobody there, so we were leaving, and the guy sitting on the porch across the street said to us, who are you looking for? And that's the guy we were supposed to be 12-stepping. Of course, he'd just seen them break into a house. And they said, oh, glad we found you. Do you want to go to a meeting with us? And he was like, oh, no. No. What I loved about that is that they didn't take life seriously, but they took alcoholism seriously, and they knew they could go back and make amends for the guy whose house they broke into. But, I love that, and that's the enthusiasm I got sober in. And, I was reading something in the book one night, and I didn't even know what it was. I thought the book was terribly written and really poor. Whatever. I was reading it, and it said something about telling somebody something immediately, right? So I called this woman who'd been tormenting me up, and I said, Sandy, I think I need a sponsor. And she said, yeah. I said, well, would you sponsor me? And she said, I have been, but thanks for making it official. Click. And that's how I got my sponsor, and I have to tell you, she was good as gold and the patience of a saint. I was in her kitchen one day reading through the book with her, And I said to her, I know what it says, Sandy, but do you know what they mean? And before I could enlighten her, her book came across the room and just missed me. And I said, geez, Sandy, what you doing? She said, no. When you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you read the black bits. There is nothing in between the lines. What they say is what they mean. And, of course, I'm a mumbler, right? I'm like, I don't know. I think it might be a little deeper than that, you know. I don't know how she didn't beat me to death, you know. But she was really good as gold, and she dragged me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, I was in her living room one day, and I said, you know, Sandy, it's really a waste of your time and mine, because I always drink. I always do. I'm going to drink. I always drink. And she said, well, if you're always going to drink, how about we just don't drink tonight? You know. And she said, you know, if you truly take on steps 6 and 7, if you truly incorporate them in your life and you change, you never have the excuse of I've always been and I'm always going to be. And she gave me hope that night, you know. And I went over to Sandy's one day after work. They were promoting me. They were sending me to Belgium. Belgium. I just thought it was a place on the news. I didn't think people really lived there, you know. So I went over to Sandy's and I said, they're promoting me, Sandy. I'm going to Belgium. And she said, what's the problem, Hilda? And I said, well, I'm only 9 months sober. I'm not supposed to have any major changes in the first year. And she said, I'm really sorry. Your company didn't get the memo. Pack your bags. So I moved to Belgium and I was miserable. And I tried duvet therapy. I'm sure nobody's here has ever done that. You know, you get home from work, get under the duvet, get up the next day and hope it all changes. It doesn't work, but I didn't drink. And I finally gave in and I called Sandy and I told her what was going on. And she told me to blow the dust off my big book and get my happy little arse 20 minutes up the road to the Brussels meeting. And when I got there, she wanted me to share honestly. And I was like, whatever. So I drive up to Brussels and I go to this meeting. And when I get there, you know, they have almost no literature, and their coffee is like sludge. And when I shared, I told them so. And afterwards, they gave me the literature commitment, and they took me to coffee. And I learned about putting my hand out again, you know. And I got offered a job in London, and I did it all different. You know, I went over every weekend. I had a home group waiting for me when I got there. I had a service commitment waiting for me when I moved. People in AA in London helped me find a flat. And things went really smooth, and I didn't have to do duvet therapy. And I started to realize, I should say, what you meant when you said to do something different for a different result. I had heard you say that, but I had never tried it. And, you know, my sobriety hasn't really been textbook sobriety, but it has worked for me. I was about 2.5 years sober, and I was at a convention in Ireland, and I heard this speaker say, you can do absolutely anything in Alcoholics Anonymous if you're willing to do the work and pay the price. And I thought, okay. So I went back to London. I quit my job. I went on the dole and I started applying to universities. I was going to go into a helping profession. I was going to help people. 2.5 years sober, I did not know enough to know that I don't like people enough to do that. Right? Sometimes I think it shouldn't be any major changes in the first 5 years, you know. I was about 4 years sober when I got my first tattoo and my first motorcycle. And there's more bikes out there than that. I've seen them. I was about 4.5 years sober. I got accepted to university, and I was about 5 years sober. I had a motorcycle accident, and I got a bigger bike and a bigger tattoo. And I started my second year at university. And, you know, nobody in Alcoholics Anonymous seemed terribly surprised about that. And I thought it was because they believed in me. And later I found out it's because they believe in Alcoholics Anonymous, that you can do absolutely anything if you do the work and you pay the price. And I was tootling along quite nicely in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm 6.5 years sober. And I was just about to leave my flat to go to a convention in the south of England, and the phone rang, and it was my mom. And my mom was living in Southern California, and she called to tell me that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And she asked if I would fly out to California in a couple of months when she had these big operations, and I said I would. And I went on to the convention that night, and I was standing in line for registration, and a fellow who'd known me since I got sober pulled me aside, and he said, "Would you share at the midnight meeting tonight?" And I said, "I really don't think so." And he said, "Actually, you look like you need to share." What I didn't realize was that my outsides were starting to match my insides, and he could see that. And he said, "You know, Hilda, there'll be nobody there. It's the midnight meeting. The old-timers meeting is going on at the same time. It'll be fine." And I was like, "Fine, I'll be there." So I go to this meeting. There's 250 people in the room. At 6.5 years sober, it was the first time I'd ever cried in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never cried. And in fact, when you cried, I used to tap your knee, sorry. I had no frame of reference. And I cried when I shared about my mom. And something happened to me that night because a fella I barely knew stood up in the back of the room and offered me a flight to Los Angeles if I couldn't afford it. The fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous touched me that night. It's the first time I realized that I was part of something bigger than a meeting, that I was part of a fellowship, and that I was in the middle of the bed. And, when the time came, I did fly out to California. And, I'd spent my entire sobriety asking my sponsor, how do I make amends to this woman, my mom? I'm an only child. I tore her heart out. I called my mom collect from 4 jails, and she could do nothing, My sponsor always says, if you're sitting here with us tonight, there are 10 people sleeping better, 10 people digesting their dinner better, because you're safe here with us. Well, I'll tell you, my mom is one of the 10. And my sponsor kept saying, it's God's time, not yours. And when the time is right, you'll know. So I went out to Pasadena, and she was in Huntington Hospital, and the 202 Club was right across the street. And I made sure I was there when she went to sleep, and I was there when she woke up. And when I had the chance, I ran across to the 202 Club. And, oddly enough, I say, is it odd or is it God? Oddly enough, because of what I had been doing at university, I got to take my mom home early and nurse her at home. And we were in there, and I was changing her tubes one day, and my mom turned to me and said, Hilda, I don't know how I'll ever repay you. I said, you don't get it. 6.5 years I have waited for this moment when I get to be the daughter you deserved instead of the one you had. And, my mom and I have a great relationship today. And I love that thing. Life is not measured by the number of breaths you take, but by the moments that take your breath away. Because that's been my sobriety. It's not about the years. It's about those moments. We just had dinner with her the other night. And, she's in remission and she's doing well. And, for her 60th birthday, which is a good few years ago now, she wanted to go home to Ireland. And she asked me if I would take her home to Ireland. She was born and raised. And I said I would. And I said to my sponsor, I'm taking my mom home to Ireland for her birthday. And my sponsor said, just remember, this is your mother's trip. I said, yeah. She goes, no, I'm serious, Hilda. I was like, yeah, all right. So I took my mom back to Ireland, and we went all around where she grew up and where she bought her sweets and where she caught the bus. And I wanted to shoot myself. And but I remembered it was my mother's trip, and I went to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you reminded me that this was my mother's trip. And we were on Bray Mountain one day, and my mom turned to me and she said, Hilda, you've turned into a lovely young woman. My mom. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. There's no other explanation. And when I was in London, I was working for a company whose head office was in New York. And in 2001, I went to New York in August, and I found out I was getting a promotion. I was going to be a god. And it was about time. I knew they'd see my worth one day, And whenever I'm in New York, I used to go office, hotel, meeting, hotel, office. That's all I ever did. And I always have a home group away from home because that's how I do Alcoholics Anonymous. I cannot afford to be anonymous in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was in New York, and I was going to have this big corner office with this beautiful view, and on my way to my meeting that night, I called my partner and said, "Pack it up, babe. We are moving to New York City. I'm going to be a god." My partner, who has 3 months longer sobriety than I do, and will tell you so, said, "Of course we are. Why didn't you call me after the meeting?" I thought, you're not getting this. I'm going to be a god. So I go to this meeting, and I sit in my seat because I'm predictable. And I'm sitting in this meeting, and I'm thinking about my corner office and the view. And this kid comes over to me, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Do you remember me?" I said, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm thinking, why would I know this kid? I'm going to be a god. And he tapped me on the shoulder again, and he said, "You shared at my very first meeting, and I'm a year sober tonight." And it meant the world to this kid that I was in town on his anniversary. And I had one of those moments when I realized it wasn't about the corner office, and it wasn't about being a god. It was about being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous, being of service to my mother, being of service. And I went back, I turned down the promotion, and I went back to London. And 2 weeks later, the towers disappeared. And I spent the next 36 hours checking off names on a list that people who just wanted somebody to know they were okay. Most everybody else in the office went to the pub to watch it on telly. But I got to be of service because you taught me how in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I was about 8 years sober, we moved out to Southern California so it could be near my mom. And went on a 5-year plan, stayed 7, you know how that goes. And Southern California changed my entire sobriety. I met the woman who's my sponsor today who reminded me that my primary purpose is to be of maximum service to God and his fellows. It's a pretty clear statement, and I had lost that somewhere along the way. And a few years ago, we had to go back to Ireland for my partner's visa. And I'll be honest with you, I did not get on well in Ireland, but I'm well trained in Alcoholics Anonymous. I phoned my sponsor every day, and I phoned her every day from Ireland. And finally, I said, "Look, Sharon, I don't know what to do." And she said, "Maybe it's time you get on an effing plane." And I hung up the phone, and my partner said, "What did Sharon say?" I said, "Well, she told me to get on an effing plane." She said, "Can I give you a lift to the airport?" Because we knew we'd work it out, right? So I came back to Southern California. I was 15 and a half years sober, jobless, penniless, sleeping on my mom's floor. Not where I wanted to be at 15 and a half years sobriety, And I had a tough time getting a job, and I threw myself into the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't know what else to do. I got busy. And was feeling a little low, and I called Sharon, and I said, "Look, Sharon, I don't know what to do. I can't get a job, and I don't know what." And Sharon said, "Hang on a minute, Hilda. Aren't you and your mom having dinner together a couple of nights a week?" I said, "Well, yeah." And she said, "And aren't you watching certain shows on telly together a couple of nights a week?" And I said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Don't you think this might be a way to make amends to your mother by allowing her to be your mother?" And if I'm honest, I wasn't really buying it at the time, but it sounded good. And in hindsight, I know she was right, And of course, what happened was my partner got back in the country, I got a good job, we got nice cars, we moved into a nice flat, and life got good, And in 2011, I guess it was, the company I was working for was going under. So I called my mom. And I said, Mom, the company's going under, and I'm going to be unemployed again. And my mom went, "You can come live with me." It took my mother 24 hours to realize I'd given her bad news. She phoned me the next day, "Oh, I'm really sorry about your news, Hilda." In March of 2012, I was up for 2 jobs at the same time. One was with unmanned drones for the military, and the other was with the Spirit of Giving. Now, if you've had more than a 10-minute conversation with me, you know I am an unmanned drones for the military kind of girl. My sponsor, who is an ex-bong wine drinking hippie, said, "I think the Spirit of Giving would be really good for you." Unmanned drones, Spirit of Giving. So I said to her, I was trying to be smart, really. I said to her, why don't we leave it to God? She said, I think that's a great idea. So we decided I would take whoever offered me the job first. And next month, actually in April, I'll be 3 years at this Spirit of Giving. I'll stop. We have slides from the second floor to the first and barefoot Fridays. You know, we do this thing every year. Every year, your year anniversary and every 2 years after, you go on a giving trip, which is what our company does. And I went to Honduras, and I got to participate in this giving trip. And I was unplugged for 10 days, which is unheard of for me to start with. And every morning I'd get up and get in the van, because that's what we did. You get up and get in the van, and we'd go to these far-off places in Honduras, to these schools, and put shoes on little kids' feet. And we were in this area of Honduras where the children are direct descendants of Mayans, and the Honduran government does not acknowledge them. So their school has no electricity and no running water, and they're the happiest kids you've ever met. And we had to give these kids shoes. And as we were packing up to go one day across the valley, I could see this little fella whose shoes we did, and he had them up in his hands, and he was waving to us. And my heart cracked open just a little bit. Just a little bit. And you know, the thing is, I almost missed it. I almost missed it. You know, I am truly the product of strong sponsorship. You know, I take direction from a woman I don't always like to do things I don't understand and usually don't like. But I tell you what, I have a life today that I could not have planned, you know. And the funny thing is, I'm really good at this job. And I'm glad I didn't miss it. You know, I'm really glad I didn't miss it. And, you know, my father died when I was 22. And my dad only ever wanted the best for me, but my dad knew exactly what and who I was. You know, he was under no illusions, my father. I was in Connecticut when I was working. He came out on a Christmas holiday once, and I was at the Christmas party, and my boss had to call him to come get me. I think I was 19. I wasn't even legal to drink. And my father came to get me, and of course I was legless. And he was a big guy, and he threw me over his shoulder. And my boss, I could hear my boss apologizing, saying, you know, we just didn't know that she drank that much. We don't know how it happened. And I'd been drinking Black Russians, and my father said, oh, don't worry, it's not the first time Hilda fought the Russians and lost, you know. And that was my dad. My father's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and I was so drunk when we buried him, and I had no clue how important it was or what it was all about, really. And a number of years ago, I was going to Washington, D.C. for a works conference, and my sponsor said, you know, it's probably time. It's probably time you go see your dad and make it right. Now, when he passed away, they had given me this like a certificate thing to get through the gates of Arlington. Now, I've moved all over the world drunk and sober. And when we were going to Washington, D.C., and we knew we were going to Arlington, I was able to put my hand right on it. And I don't know how things like that happen, but so we rented a car and we went, and as we drove into Arlington National Cemetery, the guards at the gates came to attention and saluted. And I wasn't prepared for it at all. And I drove straight to my father's grave. Knew exactly where it was, and I didn't know how that happens either. And, you know, I was at my dad's grave, and I realized in the moment there that my father would be proud of me today. Not because I've been of service to my mother, not because I've got a bachelor's or finished a master's, or that I've been in a long relationship, or, you know, even that I'm sober. My father would be proud of me today because somewhere along the way, I got a little bit of grace and dignity, just a little. I have a long way to go, but the women in Alcoholics Anonymous have really taught me how to be a lady. You know, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I came to a lying, bedwetting whore. And I am so grateful today that my first sponsor explained to me exactly what Alcoholics Anonymous is and what it isn't. You know, she pulled me aside one day and she said, remember, Hilda, Alcoholics Anonymous is not high school. It is not about being liked. It's not about being popular. It's not about getting a job or losing a job or getting married or getting divorced or getting married or getting divorced or getting married or getting divorced. Or it's not about starting smoking or stopping smoking. It's not about stopping swearing. It's not about any of those things. Alcoholics Anonymous is about staying sober and helping somebody else do the same. That's it. And if you keep it that simple, you'll have a chance of staying sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am so grateful for that. Because I hear people say sometimes, you know, get a buddy. When I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, nobody wanted to be my buddy. Nobody wanted to get, no. Nobody has to like you to stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. You just get to keep showing up, you know. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous for that. You know, I have the privilege of sponsoring women today, and, you know, I sponsor women exactly the way my sponsor sponsors me. You know, I never ask them to do more than I'm doing, and my sponsor sets the bar pretty high. You know, but I am so grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous. From a lying, bedwetting whore to a good friend, a loving and monogamous partner, and a true daughter to my mother, I thank you.